My name is Mara, and I'm 31 years old. The moment that changed everything smelled like cinnamon and rosemary. Because that was the night my brother stood up at Thanksgiving, raised his glass, and told our entire family that he now owned the company I had bled for, and that I was getting nothing. I remember the exact weight of the silence that followed. Not the quiet kind, the pressurized kind. The kind that sits on your chest and dares you to breathe. Everyone was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins who only showed up when there was something worth witnessing. The table was full. The kind of full that feels performative. Too much food, too many smiles, not enough honesty. My mom had lit the good candles, the tall cream ones she only brought out when she wanted something to look elegant. I noticed them the moment I walked in. I should have known then. My brother, Daniel, was already standing near the head of the table when I arrived. That was the first thing. He never stands near the head of the table. That's where my father sits. But there he was, jacket pressed, hair done, smile loaded, like a man rehearsed, like a man who'd been waiting. I sat down, poured my water, smiled at my aunt, said nothing, because I already knew. Let me back up. I started the company 6 years ago from a one-bedroom apartment with a folding table and a laptop that overheated if I ran more than 2 programs at once. I was 25, no investors, no co-founder, no safety net. Just a niche I understood better than anyone and a stubbornness that my mother called a flaw and my clients eventually called a feature. Year 1, I barely broke even. Year 2, I paid myself for the first time. By year 4, I had 11 employees, 3 long-term contracts, and a reputation that people in the industry actually recognized. My family came in slowly. My dad offered advice that felt more like redirects. My mom suggested I bring Daniel on because, and I still remember the exact words, he's good with people. Daniel, who had floated through 2 careers and a business school dropout like a man allergic to finishing anything. I said yes. Because family. Because I thought loyalty worked both ways. I gave him a client-facing role, paid him well, let him take meetings I had built the foundation for, watched him shake hands I had spent years earning the right to shake. And slowly, gradually, the way water reshapes stone, he began to speak about the company as though it were his idea. I noticed. I just didn't say anything yet. Then, 8 weeks ago, I found the email. It wasn't addressed to me. It was a forwarded thread my mother accidentally CC'd me on before catching herself and sending a follow-up saying, "Ignore that, wrong thread." But I'd already read it. 3 sentences, my father's name, a lawyer's name, and the words, "full transfer of operational ownership." I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop, sat in my kitchen, and let myself feel every layer of it. The shock wore off in about 4 minutes. The clarity came next. I didn't panic. I didn't call them. I didn't confront anyone. I made an appointment with my own lawyer the following morning, and I started building a folder. So when I walked into Thanksgiving dinner and saw Daniel standing near my father's chair with that pressed jacket and that rehearsed smile, I was ready. I had been ready for weeks. The folder was in my bag. Not a metaphorical folder, a literal one. Tabbed, organized, devastating. Daniel waited until plates were being passed. Strategic timing. Everyone comfortable, guard down, turkey in hand. He tapped his glass twice, and the table quieted with the kind of obedience that only happens in families where one person has always been allowed to command the room. "I just want to take a moment," he said, "to say how grateful I am." He looked at my parents. My mother smiled. My father nodded. One of those slow, deliberate nods that's trying very hard to look natural. "Mom, Dad, thank you for trusting me with the company, for believing I was the right person to lead it into the next chapter." He paused. I picked up my water glass. "Mara's contributions have been noted, but going forward, she won't have a role in operations." He said it gently, almost kindly, like he was doing me a favor by saying it out loud. The table went quiet in that specific way where everyone is pretending they didn't just hear something awful. My aunt looked at the centerpiece. My cousin reached for the bread. My uncle cleared his throat. And my parents looked at each other in the quiet way of people who had rehearsed this moment and were relieved it was finally over. No one looked at me. I took a slow sip of water, and then I set my glass down. "Daniel," I said, "can I ask you something?" He blinked. He hadn't expected me to speak. I could see it, the micro-hesitation, the recalibration behind his eyes. "Of course," he said. "When you say they handed you the company, do you mean legally, like with documentation?" The question was quiet, conversational even, but I watched his jaw shift. "Obviously," he said. "It's been in the works for months." "Okay," I nodded slowly, "because I'm confused about something, and I think everyone here deserves to understand it before we keep talking." I reached into my bag. I didn't rush. I didn't make a show of it. I simply placed the folder on the table next to my plate, like it had always belonged there. "When I started the company," I said, "I did it alone. The incorporation documents reflect that. The initial equity agreements reflect that. The bank account history reflects that." I opened to the first tab. "I have copies of all of them here." The table had gone completely still. My brother's smile had not disappeared, but it had frozen. The kind of frozen that happens when something is trying very hard not to collapse. "Mara," my mother started. "Mom," my voice didn't waver. "They chose this dinner. They chose this table. If we're going to have this conversation, we're going to have it with facts." I turned to my father. "Dad, do you want to explain the transfer attempt? Or should I?" And there it was, the moment his eyes finally met mine. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something he'd convinced himself he'd never reach. "There's a process," he started. The lawyer said it would require my signature," I said, "which I was never asked for, because the plan, as far as I can tell, was to pressure me into compliance after the announcement, rather than ask for my consent before it." I heard my uncle inhale. My cousin put down their fork. My brother said my name, sharp, the way you say a name when you're trying to stop something. I didn't stop. "I've had my own legal counsel for 6 weeks," I said. "I know exactly what was attempted. I know it didn't succeed. And I came here tonight prepared to let everyone make the right choice, to be honest, to correct course, to handle this like a family." I paused. "But that's not the choice that was made." Daniel's voice rose. He said I was being dramatic, that our parents had built everything, that I had used family connections and now I wanted to cut everyone out. He said it loudly, the way people speak when they want volume to substitute for accuracy. I let him finish. Then I slid the second page of the folder across the table toward him. "That's the founding loan," I said, "in my name, repaid in full, before any of you were involved." Someone said, "Oh," quietly. I don't know who. My father sat back in his chair. My brother looked at the paper for a long moment. And then something went out of him. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a fire goes out when you stop feeding it. The argument continued for a while. It always does. Voices climbed and fell and climbed again. My mother cried. My father tried to reframe things as miscommunication. My brother called it betrayal, which I thought was an interesting word for him to use. But the room had shifted. It had shifted the moment I placed the folder on the table. I stayed until I had said everything I needed to say. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just remained, steady, present, factual, until the space ran out of arguments that the evidence didn't already answer. Then I put my coat on, thanked my aunt for the green bean casserole, and walked out into a cold November night with my folder under my arm, and something I hadn't felt in months sitting quiet and solid in my chest. Relief. Not the fragile kind, the permanent kind. The weeks after were difficult in the way that true things often are. There were messages, long ones, apologies that were really explanations, explanations that were really deflections. Eventually, an acknowledgement from my father that was the closest thing to the truth I was going to get from him for a while. The transfer was abandoned. My legal standing was never in real danger, but that wasn't actually the point. The point was that for years I had believed that keeping the peace meant staying quiet, that family loyalty required me to shrink when I should have stood still, that the cost of being chosen by the people you love was agreeing to disappear when they asked you to. I don't believe that anymore. What I know now is this: truth, once placed on the table, doesn't ask permission to stay. And calm, genuine, prepared, documented calm, is louder than anything my brother's glass tapping could ever be. When people ask if I regret how that dinner ended, I think about the folder, about the 6 weeks I spent quietly preparing instead of falling apart, about the moment my father finally looked at me. I don't regret a single page. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've been the one who built something, given everything, and been told to step aside like none of it counted, stay with this channel. These stories are for you. Subscribe so you're here for the next one, because the truth always deserves a seat at the table.